Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. Thank you for joining us today for our CX Global Voices 2021 webinar in association with Award International. We are all extremely proud at Ipsos to present the result of this study, which is one of the most extensive CX trend study conducted with CX professionals from around the world. So the aim of this study is to understand how CX professionals perceive the evolution of CX in their industry, their main challenges, and the key trends that will shape the coming years. So of course, if you have any questions, please do type them in the chat box and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. So today our speaker would be my colleague Catherine and Nicholas from Ipsos, and we have Neil from Award International. Neil, would you like to say a few words before we start?
Hi, Stefan. Thanks very much. Yeah, welcome everybody. I'm proud to have worked with Ipsos and our customers to help reply to the survey. I'm proud to have partnered with such a great organization as Ipsos for the second time. Welcome to everybody from wherever you are around the world. I'm in my hotel room in Belgrade, so I've been, I suppose, fortunate enough to be able to travel this week. So we're creeping back to some sort of normality maybe. Yes, as I said, we did this last year in the UK with CX Voices during the coronavirus to really get a read on what was going on. And we're really proud to do it this year on a global scale with Ipsos in partnership also with Customer Experience Magazine. Awards International is the proprietor of Customer Experience Magazine. So we're really proud to work with Ipsos, delighted to read the results also. And I think you're gonna be excited, you're in for a treat. It's a really interesting set of results. So without further ado, I'll hand you on to Catherine and Nico, and thanks again, and I hope you enjoyed the session.
Fantastic, thank you Neil, and thank you Stefan. So I'm really pleased to be here to talk to you today about the CX Voices research, our unique study into the opinions and views of CX professionals around the world. So in March and April, we spoke to over 1,000 CX professionals with local and global responsibilities across the globe from more than 50 different markets, and also from across a large range of sectors. We were really pleased to have such a robust spread of professionals across sectors, from banking, insurance and financial services to automotive, telco and more. And in addition to this large quantitative study, we've also conducted some deep dive qualitative interviews with some of our clients to give us some extra context and richness to the research, which we'll also be talking about today. It is worth saying before we start that we're only able, obviously, to cover a fraction of the insights that we've uncovered. So please do watch this space for further deep dive releases that we have planned, and for further events that will be launching around the world that will give a focused view into certain countries, regions, and also sectors that we will be spotlighting. So before we start and dive into the detail, some context from the market about customer experience during the pandemic. 69% of CX professionals think that CX focus has actually increased in their organization since the start of the crisis. While not directly comparable, as Neil referenced, we did ask this same question in the UK last summer, when 53% told us that CX focus has increased in their organization. This increase mirrors conversations that we've been having with our clients all around the world over the last 6 months. And really, this focus has paid off. Of those that say CX focus has increased, 53% have seen an improvement in their CX performance, and 35% have seen an improvement in financial performance. Now, we've all read and we've all heard about rapid digital acceleration across sectors and industries as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. But what is evident from talking to some of our clients is the extent to which they've actually embraced digital in the last year across their customer journeys. Many had digital evolution on their roadmap, but the pandemic has accelerated the plans quicker than expected. And as you can see here on screen, one banking client in Europe that we spoke to told us that while they are serious about digital already and have been focusing on their digital roadmap for many years, what COVID has done has just pushed us forward a lot quicker than expected. It's confirmed their conviction that this strategy was right. And this has not only impacted the customer experience, but the internal organization mindset and how functions actually work together within the organizations. What we gleaned from our clients was that CX, UX, and IT now really can't get away with not working as one. This change has impacted how businesses use data, create a customer-centric culture, and focus on designing experiences that will build a relationship with the brand and create long-lasting customer memories. Now, I don't want to keep you in suspense any longer, so let's talk through the key takeaways from the research before we look at each of these in more detail. So firstly, CX maturity matters. CX leaders have been more successful at tackling the CX challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. Being a leading organization translates into better CX performance and delivery on brand promises. But even CX leaders have room for more improvement. Only 1 in 2 leading companies say that they are leading in each of the CX competencies, and only 1 in 10 say that, 1 in 10 say that they are foundational. I'll explain in a bit more detail, but strategy, cultural enablement, and evidence impact have emerged as the hardest areas to overcome. And personalization is the #1 CX priority. After personalization, CX leaders prioritize linking employee and customer experience, whereas foundation level organizations want to establish a clear roadmap and close the brand promise and customer experience delivery gap. What is key though, is that establishing a return on CX investment is equally important for all organizations, regardless of CX maturity. This topic is the focus of our newest Ipsos CX thought paper, Money Talks or Budget Walks, which demonstrates the importance of client experience in building a powerful business case for change by quantifying the impact of CX on business performance. Now, I will take us through CX maturity and areas for improvement before handing over to my colleague Nico, who will focus on the what next future view. So, how can this momentum of CX focus and performance be leveraged and maximized? We know that assessing CX maturity needs to be the starting point of any successful organization's CX roadmap. This research finds that only 1 in 8 say their organization is leading based on our CX maturity framework. But I hear you ask, what is our CX maturity framework? Well, we know that organizations operate at one of 3 levels of CX maturity, and you'll see those in the circle on the right. These are leading, practiced, and foundational. And from this research, 13% classify themselves as leading, 47% as practiced, and 40% as foundation. Our framework and approach assesses overall maturity stage and assesses maturity across each individual competency. As you can see on screen, these core competencies are classified as strategy and sponsorship, customer understanding, CX insight ecosystem, evidence impact, cultural enablement, and future state roadmap. Now, I wanted to show you this regional view of overall maturity, because while it looks like a fairly assimilated picture, a fairly similar picture, there is variation by region and country. If you look at MENA and South Africa, which is on the far left, they are most likely to rate themselves as leading. However, leading organisations still only account for 1 in 5 organisations. And Western Europe is an interesting region, the second one in. So while fewer organisations describe themselves as leading, they are also the least likely to rate themselves as foundation. There is a huge amount more to deep dive into here, and we have seen a vast difference within some of these regions themselves. So, for example, while APAC leading organisations stands at 12%, China is 30%, and while Europe overall stands between 12 and 15%, France is at 20%, UK is at 17%, and Hungary, for example, is at 8%. Specific market views are being developed. Watch this space for local events that are led by CX leaders in each of these markets around the world. And when we take the sector view, and this chart is ranked by the highest percent of leading organisations from left to right, we also see an interesting trend emerging. For all sectors, the proportion of organisations that are leading is higher than the proportion of those that say most organisations in their sector are leading. Also, CX professionals are less likely to say that they are foundation than they are to say that most organisations in their sectors are foundation, although I'm sure you've spotted the exception there of manufacturing. So to just reiterate, for automotive, who are the sector that are most likely to say that their organisation is leading, 1 in 5 think they're leading. On the other end of the scale, nearly 2/3 of manufacturing firms, and these include CPG, say that they are foundational, which is interesting considering the increased focus on direct-to-customer relationships that we've seen from working with our clients in that sector. We're working with clients across all of these sectors around the world, across varying maturity levels, and ensuring that organisations are on the correct roadmap for them is what is essential. We're doing maturity assessments like this all the time, and this is really the first step for foundation level organisations to begin their journey to becoming a CX leader. So why does any of this matter? Being a CX leader does ultimately mean being best placed for success. When asked how successful their business has been at coping with CX challenges posed by COVID, leading organisations were by far the most likely to say that they have been very successful. And this compares to those that are foundational and also practiced. And those that were the least successful were significantly more likely to be foundational. Foundational organisations are also significantly more likely to think that the experiences that they deliver to their customers are generally worse than their brand promise, with 1/3 admitting this. This compares to 22% globally who said that the experiences they deliver are generally worse than promised. So it really does make a difference if you're a CX leader. But are leading organisations excelling in all aspects of CX maturity? We asked the CX professionals to rank their level of maturity against each core competency. And the answer is a resounding no. When we look at the 6 core competencies in turn, which you can see on screen, only around half of overall leaders rate themselves as leading in any specific core competency. And in fact, 1 in 10 say that they are foundational in any given competency. There are 3 competencies, strategy and sponsorship, evidence impact, and cultural enablement, that CX leaders are more likely to say that they are practiced in than they are leading. So where within these is there still work to do? If we take each of the 3 core competencies in turn, let's look at the characteristics at the leading level of CX maturity, starting first, as you can see, with strategy and sponsorship. So while board level ownership and accountability for CX and strategy and vision being aligned with customer needs are in place and active for 3/4 of leaders, organizations find it difficult to translate CX understanding into operational and commercial decisions. As you can see, just 61% say that this is in place and active. And when it comes to cultural enablement, leading organizations need to place greater emphasis on employee engagements within customer experience. 1 in 10 don't even have it on the roadmap. Focus needs to be on amplifying service examples and case studies, as well as ensuring employees have access to customer feedback and initiatives that can improve performance. And when it comes to evidence impact, while the value of CX is known by leaders, far fewer use advanced analytics to identify the financial value of CX improvement. 14% do not have advanced analytics in place or even on the roadmap, which we know allows the financial value of CX improvements and investment. Predictive analytics are an absolute game changer for clients, and we helped a global bank prove the benefits of a boost in their CX metrics at $93 million. And this was the grounding that they really needed to ring-fence their CX budget with stakeholders. Now, I will hand over to Nico to talk through what is next for the future.
Thank you, Catherine. It's very interesting to see how maturity is impacting professionals' priorities and focusings. There are so many different opportunities that arise from this research that I'm sure that everybody who's watching is interesting to see what's next. So what I'll do in the next section, I'll be telling you, so what are the key priorities professionals from around the world are looking at. But before we move into the next slide, I just wanted to take 1 minute of your time. Just take a pen and write it down if you have a post-it there, and just write down what are the key priorities for your organization, and let's see if they match up with what our panel has responded today into our own questionnaire. So what's next? That's the big question. So we asked about what were the top 3 priorities for the next 12 months. We gave respondents more than 12 different alternatives for them to choose, and this is the results. So as Catherine stated before, focusing on delivering a personalized experience ranks at number 1. But we can see that today, in an era where the amount of data being collected, today we're going to talk about how all of this data and how companies can take this data and bring it back into their service, into their design, and become more tailor-fit to each customer. You can see that after personalization, closing the gap between the brand promise and the CX delivery is the number 2 priority, and demonstrating the customer experience return over investment, which we call ROXI, ranks in number 3. What we'll do now is we'll expand on these results. So the next big question is, what do we do with all of this data? The questions professionals have is, don't we know them? Or if you're a customer, don't you know me? Personalization is key. The amount of data being is so vast, so big, that companies are looking on ways on how to activate all of this data and deliver a more personalized service and experience. You know, customers like yourself can become frustrated when businesses are not joined up and this data is not being used in the proper way. Today, customers are looking way beyond your own product or your own category. They're looking at every place, and personalization examples can come from every way. You can see that today companies that are being born online are driving customers' expectations and probably setting several of the standards. It's a different way of thinking, you know. They think on customers being personal, being predictive, and also being proactive in the way they deliver their own services. Let's talk a little bit about closing the gap between the brand CX promise. You know, today meeting up with the customer experience, it's going to be more difficult than before. You know, we can see that the gap between the brand promise and the CX delivery, it's going to be more complicated as expectations have been recalibrated because of COVID. You know, these expectations have been changed, even if the underlying needs of the customers remains the same. You know, companies today are going to have just a few chances to get the experience right because there's so many different alternatives, and customers' patience is shorter than probably before. As you can see that the digital focus is increasingly hard, we can see that there's going to be more omni-channel experiences. And as we said before, customers are going to be comparing these omni-channel journeys from different sectors. So being clear on what you are, what you stand for, is going to be very important in injecting that thought into all of the different journeys. So start designing based on the customer needs, emotions, and bringing these expectations probably is more important than ever before. I just touched on the omni-channel, but we see that closing the omni-channel gap is also going to be more important than before. We have seen an increasing jump of all of the digital channels and all of the different touch points that companies have. So professionals classify that closing the gap between the omni-channel journey is once a priority, but also a challenge for all of them. You know, we need to think that digital won't be right all of the time. We've spoke a lot about digital, but it won't be right for all of the customers. We've seen that more than 50% of customers around the world continue to have an important focus, or they haven't changed in regards of their shopping habits in face-to-face, in small and locally owned companies around the corners. So what we're going to start looking is a shift in the face-to-face and frontline engagements. For example, in the financial space, probably face-to-face will continue to be important, but now for different types of journeys. Probably they're going to come more in the financial space, more in the advisory side of things, as customers can solve more of their journeys by themselves in the digital space. If we look, for example, at brick and mortar, what we hear is they're going to come back and wow us with all of their retail stores. Stores, as we know them, as a place where you can go and find lots of stock and select a couple of products and go away, are probably going to have to change their focus into a place where we can add value to customers' experience, increase the performance that we have in showcasing their products, and probably be able to deliver a more emotive and immersive experience for all of them. As customers start going back to locations, you know, here in COVID is still hitting us pretty hard. Health and safety is going to be really important. We can see from research from all over the world and recently in the States, as the economy continues to open, that health and safety stands as one of the most important priorities for customers when selecting a store to visit. So it's very important that companies are tuned into what customers' needs are and use the proper tools to deliver that impact in the experiences as we are mentioning before. Let's talk a little bit about demonstrating the return of customer experience investment, which stands as a priority from across the globe. You know, this is really important, but it's important in a different way for different types of clients. An insurance client told us in Asia that it's becoming very effortful to demonstrate the customer experience return, because probably it's not a muscle that they have already developed inside of the enterprise. In several C-suites, we see that those organizations still focus more on putting resources or allocating resources in marketing, and probably their focus on CX is not there yet. it's still deemed a challenge to prove the correlations between customer satisfaction, spending, and some other key metrics. But what CX teams are doing is they're proving their worth internally and moving upwards in this direction. We're able to see also, if we bring what Catherine told us at the beginning, that maturity also affects the priorities for CX professionals. Personalization holds as the most important priority for both foundational and leaders. But we can see that CX leaders prioritize linking the employee and the customer experience, where foundational organizations still need to develop the roadmap and focus on closing the brand promise delivery gap. The demonstration of the return on customer experience investment holds as the most important, regardless the maturity of the organization. But you can see that there are the three priorities, like closing the loop, feedback, reassess the CX targets, and also understanding what the CX maturity is of the organization. They stand on transversally on the maturity status. So what I'll do now is I'll hand it out back to Stefan so he can help us summarize these findings and wrap up this presentation.
Thank you, Nico, and thank you, Catherine, for presenting the result of CX Global Voices 2021. So this study is extremely important for Ipsos to help the CX community gain clarity and guidance in times where everything we knew has been disrupted and everything we planned has been challenged. So the three key takeaways that we just presented to you are: one, that CX maturity matters, and this is a critical element to ensure that you actually adopt the right strategy for your organization. Two, that CX is a discipline that evolves at a fast pace, and CX leaders have room for improvement to ensure that they deliver an impact. And three, that personalization is your #1 priority, and you will need to ensure that you can deliver an omnichannel experience that brings value to your customers. So this is not the end. There is a lot more to come with specific and detailed insights that we're going to share in the coming weeks from our teams around the world. So please do get in touch with them, whether you want country, industry, or regional insight. You can also, of course, access the Ipsos thought leadership that was mentioned during this presentation at ipsos.com. So we are going to go through some of the questions that came through with Nico and Catherine. If you have more questions, please continue to send them, and we will try to answer as much as we can during the few minutes that we have left with. So first question for you, Catherine, and this one is coming from LATAM. So how can I gauge my CX maturity?
Good question. Thank you, Stefan, and thank you, whoever asked this. So there are absolutely a number of tools available in the market. They vary kind of hugely and widely, and some are free, some very expensive. I'm sure you've seen kind of the array of things on the market. In terms of what the Ipsos offer is, we have kind of two flavors, as it were, of what you can really do. So we have what we call a 180-degree version. This is much smaller. It's for kind of groups of maybe up to 20 stakeholders. And then there is what we call the 360-degree version. And this is the 180, plus it also includes the sort of frontline perspective. So you can get both of those included. Now, it's really important to say that this is not only important, and I think this has really come through with lots of clients we've done it with, it's not only about measuring the CX maturity, but for the people that you're engaging in the process, it's really about driving consensus, increasing awareness of what you're trying to do, the common understanding, and making sure that teams and individuals are understanding the why and how we can really build in kind of priorities for the business. So, you know, just to conclude, I think it helps for that step back, objective view, to add a layer of why and so what on top of what you already know as an organization, to know what to do as your actions next.
Thanks, Catherine, for the detailed answer. So I was scrolling, I have one for you, Nico. I think it's related to the part you were discussing about personalization. So the question is, what is specifically about personalization that is important?
Well, thanks, Stefan, for that question. You're right. Probably whoever sent this question is right. Probably the term is a little bit generic. And you know, we run some qual research with this project, and we got some deeper insights on that. So for some companies, probably in a more foundational status, it's about being able to map the data that they have from the customers, and afterwards being able to get this data working on a digitalization strategy and moving onwards to being able to activate this. But probably from other companies that maybe they're more in the leading side of things, it's more about being able to activate this information and effectively being able to transform it into products, into services at the right time. What we'll be doing in the next couple of months is that we'll be releasing some more of this information, and hopefully in regional and local events.
Great, thanks, Nico, for sharing that. Well, I think the next one will be for you also. So the question is, you said that demonstrating a return on customer experience investment is the same priority for both foundational and leading organization. How can this be the case?
Yes, thank you for that. It was also an interesting insight for us because it's recognized that being able to drive customer experience results is something that is increasingly important for companies. But also it's a challenge, as they told us. So we see that probably more foundational organizations are working on connecting their NPS, you know, their promoters, their detractors, to some key financial impact metrics. So probably that's going to be their focus. But for other companies that already have their programs in line, that they have all of this data, it's probably more about being able to start looking at the prediction of the results, you know, looking at how these results connect to the future and what are the next steps in terms of their CX strategy. So it's probably a priority for the two different types of customers, but you can see that it implies that you need to have different competences at that point.
Great, thanks, Nico, for sharing that. So there is a fairly long question that just came through, and I think it will be for you, Catherine. I will try to summarize it. So not surprisingly, we see that CX practitioners think that they are doing well. But in your view, what would be the gap between what is their perceived performance versus what their customer will actually experience?
Yeah, love it. I think this is something that is like $1 million question, isn't it, really? Understanding the different perspectives and the gap, really. I suppose a thought is that I think there's going to be a big focus on omni-channel experiences since the pandemic in this space. Customer journeys are just so important. And I don't think that a lot of organizations are necessarily seeing the interaction 100% from the customer perspective. You know, repeating the issue in an email, then having to say your issue again on a chatbot, and then having, when you finally really need the answer, having to give up all your patience and calling a call center. It's really frustrating as a customer, and I know we've all been there. You've got to, as an organization, make the data that you have on your customers, make it work for them, make the journey easier. And from the kind of research perspective, what we're going to do in the next few months is complement this piece of research, obviously from the CX professionals' point of view, with a consumer perspective. And also we have some exec board leadership research that's happening in the UK, where we're actually really going to try to understand what the CEO board level perspective is. And then we'll really be able to see the disconnect there and tie it back to the answer. So I really hope we'll kind of be back with that research fairly soon, and hopefully have a very concrete view of those different perspectives that we can share.
Great, thanks, Catherine. I'm really looking forward to look at that. So there's a lot of questions coming through, and thanks to all of you for asking and continue to ask. So Nico, I think I will ask you the next one, and I think is an interesting one. So question is, where should the function or role of CXO sit in an organization? Should it be standalone or embedded in other functions?
Thanks, Stefan. It's an interesting question and one that we keep on getting, I would say, in my case here in LATAM, more often. What we see is that companies are starting to put the customer experience right in the center. And as they start doing this, you can see that let's call it the CXO type of position, they start moving up into the organization. In some companies that today probably are more advanced, this is a function that is separated from marketing. I would say that being able to address the CX governance is one of the key elements of the CX maturity. But it's not only the only one. It's not only about being able to have the proper organization. It's also about how you can activate the results. The way you organize the company to work across the different areas is going to be super important. You can see that today as different project management tools arise, the words agile, scrum, more often used in conversations. You see that the focus is not only in the way you organize your CX governance, but also how you can be able to activate the different parts of the organization to stop working in silos and start working together in order to put the customer experience in the center and be able to form this new CX culture.
Thanks, Nico. And yeah, I fully agree with everything you just mentioned. So I think I will pick one last one because we are reaching the end. And for all of you, where if we didn't have time to answer your question, please be sure that we are going to reply to you separately. So Catherine, I think I will give you the last one, which is related to something you mentioned. So do you have benchmark on what the average ROI is for CX programs?
Good question. I think it's really important, and I completely understand the kind of want for this kind of thing. So yes, we absolutely do. We have industry examples, and we can always use this as a basis and a place to start for your organization. It's also worth saying that we have a kind of customer experience KPI benchmark database that we can call on. This has, you know, the most common KPIs in it, and we kind of feed this with all of our data. We cover in excess of 30 different sectors in there, more than 100 countries across the globe, etc. So it really is quite robust and growing. But what I would say, kind of in response to the ROI part of the question, is that really demonstrating your own organization's return on CX investment is what's important. And that is really through conducting your own maturity assessment and beginning to build out your financial performance linkage with your data and creating that model. That is what is important to demonstrate the size of what kind of your CX prize could be. And really, obviously, as I said in one of the previous questions, getting that buy-in across your organization and all of the people that kind of have a say within your business. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, it was. Thanks a lot, Catherine. And thanks, Nico, for answering all the great questions we have received so far. So unfortunately, we are reaching the end of this webinar and we are not able to answer any further questions. But like I mentioned earlier, we are going to reply to you separately right after this webinar. So stay tuned and you will receive information from our side. So I would like to end by saying on behalf of Ipsos, Award International, and the team that prepared and presented the CX Global Voices 2021, I would really like to thank all of you for joining us today. And please stay in touch with us. Do contact us at customerexperience@ipsos.com if you require any further information or if you have any further questions. So thanks a lot and have a good day or good evening.